You are watching NovaNow.tv, independent community media for Northern Virginia.
Hello and welcome to another episode of NovaNow.tv. I am your host, Sam Ettaro, coming to you from my virtual studios in beautiful Fairfax County, Virginia. And again, we are talking about what's right and what is wrong with education in Nova. And again, the focus tonight, Fairfax County, lots right and apparently a lot wrong. Now, those of you that have been watching the show know that I have been digging in deep and going up to Loudoun County, exploring Fairfax County, and just made some interesting contacts today in DC with some folks from Arlington. So I'm going to be bringing you some news stories and some exposés from other parts of Nova here very shortly, which I'm excited about. And as a former educator, this is something that I'm very passionate about. So it's not just national headlines that I'm tagging into. This is something I really deeply care about. One of the stories locally that has been popping up on occasion, making even national headlines, has been right here in Fairfax, the Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology. And what is the trouble with TJ? Tonight, we're going to find out. Strangely, well, maybe not so strangely, I found it interesting. One of the things, and seems like the battle that we are raging in, I should say here, has to do with a Democratic slash, let's say far left power base that is seizing control, doing everything they can to seize control of educational institutions. And we're seeing that in the parent backlash. That's part of what's making national headlines. Parents from across the political spectrum just standing up and saying, you know what? Nah, it's not going to fly anymore. But would it surprise you if I told you that we're seeing that same playbook, it seems, playing out at this magnet school in Fairfax County, but through the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association? I thought you would think they could get along in politics and partisanship and all that and shouldn't be playing a part in that. But we have an interesting story to tell tonight. Now, I'm going to be straight up honest with you. My friend Harry Jackson, who was on one of our last shows, has been educating me on what is happening at TJ, what has been happening at TJ, and he gave me a big document dump the other day. Now, we're going to go through this. I have not had time to go through this and digest this all myself, so I'm not going to offer any sort of opinion at this point. I, like you, am going to learn on the fly as my guests walk us through the trouble with TJ, the trouble with the TJ PTA. Let's welcome to the show Dr. Harry Jackson and Brian Davison. Harry is the president of the TJ PTA, as well as wearing other hats, and Brian Davison is a member, a concerned member, not only of the PTA, but of our community in general. Gentlemen, welcome to NovaNow.tv. Tell us about what is the trouble with the TJ PTA.
Well, thank you, Sam. Sam, just before I get started, even though I wear a lot of multiple hats, I'm involved with, I referee and everything. This isn't like an official capacity as the representing the PTSA. I'm an educational activist. This is what I've observed when we talk to mention before the danger of what we can talk about the far left power base. And it has an impact not only here at Fairfax County, but also in Loudoun that we've seen in national news. And so tonight we'll talk about how it's infiltrated not only school boards, but through the PTAs, which we've known have a very close association with teachers' unions, and how they're using the PTAs to conduct heavy-handed approaches to silence and stifle criticism, as well as parental concern within the schools.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and we'll lay the case for that. Let me real quick introduce Brian before we get going. I didn't cut you off here, but I don't want to forget about Brian. Brian, tell us who you are and your part in this tonight, and what do you want to get out of this?
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Sam. I'm Brian Davison, a parent of 2 children in Loudoun County, Virginia. My daughter now attends TJ, a magnet school for the whole Nova region. So I kind of have a foot in both Loudoun and in Fairfax. And I've actually been an activist trying to improve and reform Loudoun County schools for going on 6 or 7 years now. And as I came into TJ and joined the PTA, I became concerned that a lot of the things I saw in Loudoun were happening in TJ, and particularly very heavy-handed tactics by the PTA and the state PTA, Virginia PTA, who has basically a lot of failed Democratic politicians who've been elected as officers and are trying to suppress any dissent across local PTA. So that's kind of my major motivation in terms of being concerned about what's going on in the TJ PTA these days.
And Harry, I appreciate you going down that path, because we're laying the groundwork here as to what it is that we're trying to expose, or you guys are trying to expose. And this platform is yours tonight to do that. So it sounds like you two are on the same page as concerned parents, as leaders, as activists in our community, not just in regards to TJ, but through our entire community and the education system in general, which seems to be part of the problem, right, Harry? Because we're one of the things that they've been coming after you for has been your civic involvement, shall we say. So we're going to get into that for a second. What I want you to do first off, it's going to be a lot of people, including myself. I'm even new to know. I don't know much about TJ. So I'm learning a lot about this. I want you to give us the thumbnail sketch. Tell us what TJ is, what makes it so special, and then explain the hubbub that happened last year, because I think this ties into where we're going with this, with the admissions process, because a lot of people got up in arms about that, and that controversy is still not over, is it? Harry, fill us in on that, if you would.
Sure, absolutely. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology is a governor's school. And for the last 2 years, it was ranked as the nation's top high school. It specializes in providing STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, education to a peer group of students, that are above their peer group. And you have families from all over the world that come over from overseas, that come over here to compete to go to Thomas Jefferson.
Wow! So it's like this is an elite school.
It is. It is an elite school. It was predominantly comprised of cohorts of gifted learners, and we're talking about the top students in the world. These students are absolutely amazing, and they go on to do amazing things. And I guess to answer your other question, we'll talk about some of the controversy from last year regarding admissions changes. Prior to this year, the admissions process to Thomas Jefferson was a race-blind, gender-blind, merit-based test, which comprised a large component for admissions criteria. And the output of that process really highlighted the failures of the current school board and previous school boards of addressing systemic issues within the academic pipeline. The reason why Thomas Jefferson lacked a large number of underrepresented minorities, particularly Hispanic and Black students, was that these students were not in the pipeline to matriculate up to honors geometry by the time they're in 8th grade. Each incoming class, the racial demographic was divided by percentage by math, not by race. So the reason you had less than 3% Black and Hispanics because you had less than 3% Black and Hispanic students that were enrolled in honors geometry by the time they're in 8th grade.
Right. So it was a merit-based system, and the kids that were doing best in those fields were the ones that were getting admitted.
They're the ones that are getting admitted.
Okay.
Now, the change to the admissions process that caused a lot of controversy in a lot of ways that were slipped from underneath the rug from a lot of people was to have this movement from, and I will talk about the far left power base that really embraced this theory and concept of critical race theory, as well as its scholars, particularly Ibram Kendi, who believes that to remedy past discrimination, you have to have present discrimination, you deal with future discrimination. So it's an endless cycle of discrimination. And worse yet, it attacks a group.
He was paid what, 25 grand last year to come in and
he was paid about 25 grand to have a CRT lecture that was paid for by Fairfax.
A 1 hour lecture.
For a one hour. Oh,
yeah. Online. Yeah, didn't even have to travel.
Yeah.
Man, how do I get in on that? Didn't even have to travel. That's a gig.
I know.
Huh?
That's a gig. That's what we call the poverty pimp, right? That's called a poverty pimp when you're talking about helping those less fortunate, but you really want that problem to perpetuate. And that's what they've done with the admissions process to Thomas Jefferson, because instead of having a race-blind admissions process that shows the discrepancies in your pipeline, you now cover that up because now they're using a proprietary process that they can't share with us. And they've already stated that the intent and goal of the admissions process reform was to make sure that the school's racial demographic represents the county, which it was never designed to do. And lo and behold, you have an admissions process and output where you see the increase in both white, black, and Hispanic students increase, and at the expense of Asians. And I believe, Brian, you can correct me, I think the similar happened in Loudoun.
Yeah, Brian, elaborate on that and elaborate if you would. You saw me prop up. How is it that a public school funded with public dollars, run by public employees that work for the public, is going to say, we're not going to tell you what the admissions process is? I can't get my mind around that. Brian, go ahead.
Sure thing. To elaborate a couple things, as Harry alluded to, they changed the policy so there's no objective test. And the TJ newspaper, the students who run the newspaper, actually interviewed one of the newly admitted students this year and asked them about the admissions process. The students admitted they were never very good in math and science, yet they were admitted because now they have everything that's needed to attend TJ, which is basically they meet the preference and the quotas. Now, I've always talked to people about what is the point of a magnet school, right? The point of a magnet school, particularly in a large region as Nova, is to aggregate all the very top students who really are not challenged in the high schools. I mean, TJ allows them to go into second and third year level math and physics courses, something that you couldn't teach in a regular high school because you don't have enough students to do it. And so a lot of us as parents, we've been frustrated that the rigor at some of the middle schools and below are just too low. They're not challenging the students. And so I would say there's only really three reasons to have a magnet school. One is to challenge those students who would be bored or can't be challenged. The second one is I see this prestige. In other words, I don't really want my kid to be challenged. I just want to be able to put the name TJ next to my name. The third reason possibly is if you had a lot more materials and resources. But through the first 2-3 years of TJ, they actually don't really have any extra assets at the school. So the only reason these parents who advocate for certain demographics groups get in, they're not saying that their kids aren't challenged in middle school. In fact, they actually don't want them to be too hard in TJ. The only reason they want it is they want the prestige and they want to lower the standards so that they can be in. We saw the same thing in Loudoun, where they have a new school called the Loudoun Academies. And they went through several transitions, and they complained that the board members openly during school board meetings claimed that the Asian and Indian students were cheating by studying on their own and getting prepared for the test, and that they really didn't deserve to get in, but they just had basically cheated. And the data, of course, doesn't show that, but they recently changed it. So they said, we're going to take a certain number from each school, and that would help, even the demographics. What we saw in Loudoun this past year is Asian and Indian students, their participation or their admittance rate went down 20%, from around 73% to the mid 50s. Meanwhile, white students, who I've often complained, when I go to the after school activities for science and math, I don't see them there. I only see mainly Asian and Indians who are working on their studies. Their participation went up from like 11% to 30%. So the exact opposite happened, right? This is actually punishing Asian and Indian students who work hard and want to have a meritocratic system. I want all the different students to go participate in STEM schools. I think STEM is a great activity. But what we have here are far left politicians trying to impose critical race theory, which is I wanted to predetermine the outcome regardless of merit and individual capability. And that's basically CRT.
Right. So again, it goes back to the same playbook that we're noticing playing out in school boards here and across the nation. Harry, talk to us about your move into TJ and the capacities that you're working there. Tell us a little bit more about that and what you're doing as an activist and how that has caused this hubbub where apparently they're very concerned with you expressing these concerns. It's going to be really interesting to see their take on this video. Here you are as a concerned citizen out there speaking what you believe to be the truth, fighting what you believe to be the righteous fight, and you're going to get your wrist slapped for this? How did all this start?
Yes, unfortunately, by the Virginia PTA, they are slapping my wrist. But on the Wayback Machine, and this also elaborates on Brian's second point, where you have a lot of parents that just want to get into TJ just to have their name, not to have their kids be challenged, but for the prestige and the name. We have to go back to how I got involved. This is my journey. How did I become an educational activist? I did not see myself doing this prior to September of 2020. September 2020 is when we saw the first board's proposed admissions changes to the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. And what we saw proposed was a merit lottery system. Now, later on, we found out that the school board absolutely had no idea what the result would be, but its intent was to make the school more representative of the county. And you read between the lines, Fairfax is still a majority white county. I mean, the population has a plurality. And what they wanted to propose was a lottery system based off of regional pathways. And it was to restrict the number of students, particularly those at predominantly Asian schools, from being able to be admitted to Thomas Jefferson, specifically Rocky Run and Rachel Carson Middle School, predominantly Asian, but also producing most of the admittance to Thomas Jefferson in previous years, along with Longfellow. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to lump those two schools together, as well as a couple of other high-performing schools. And this is even more of a tragedy. They put a few schools that were predominantly attended by Title I students in that same bracket of students. So they really weren't trying to help out the minority population, but they were really looking to limit by regional pathways, by these 5 schools, how many slots per lottery can these students get admitted. And the population, if that had gone through, TJ would have been about 40% white. That we fought in court. And now we have this quota system. What brought my, as far as when you have in Loudoun County, what Brian had mentioned before, they accuse the Asian students of just cheating. I'd heard that similar accusation made in Fairfax County when we had our current superintendent, Scott Brabrand, had mentioned that parents are spending $15,000 a year on test prep. When you have Atif Carney, a McAuliffe appointee during his administration, now currently serving the North administration as the Secretary of Education, had accused parents who go to supplemental education is using steroids. Really an attack what they talk about with shadow education. And the reason why parents even supplement their child's education is because the curriculum in Fairfax County doesn't challenge them. They don't cover the algebraic concepts in depth. And we brought TJ, the purpose of TJ was, one, to challenge students, but it was also to draw business and industry into the area. And it did a great job. That's why you have people from all over the world, especially on H-1B1 visas, that are coming to this area to raise a family because of our superior educational system. So I found that very disturbing that they were vilifying a group. I saw something similar happen in historical videos. It's in black and white. It's a little hard to understand because they're in German. But we see what that turns out, how that ends up. So I was very concerned about that. I decided to get involved. I remember that when the first and also as a false premise, that the reason why they had to have change is because there were no black students admitted. And I had to raise my hand and said, really? My son's not black? Really? That's the case? Because he's one of the 6 that was in there. And I also wanted to point out that a lot of what they said simply wasn't true. There is no way a family can spend $15,000 a year in test prep, because I started to talk. I work with the Black Student Fund, and I also involved in a lot. I'm also very familiar with a lot of the other area service providers, because I've been serving on the Fairfax County Association for the Gifted for the last 10 years. And so I called about 30 providers and asked them, do you have like a mechanism to have for free and reduced services? And they all do. So it's not as if you don't have means in this county. I mean, Fairfax County is a great place to live if you're poor because there are so many resources. The problem is, it's not that there's not enough supply, it's matching supply with demand, particularly in the pipeline. And Fairfax County simply hasn't been doing that. And that stems from a lack of diversity in the teacher workforce. I mean, the FCPS workforce is overwhelmingly white, which is interesting. That's what has led to the problem of failing to identify gifted Black and Hispanic students. So that goes into my backstory, my character story, if we're talking about Marvel characters here. So then I got involved because I was passionate about diversity. So I served on the diversity committee. And a couple of things that we had done is I wasn't the one that run it, Helen Miller was, but she had like a diversity talks where she would bring in speakers, minorities, professionals in the STEM field, talking about how they got into the STEM field, why they were there, what drove them there, what path they took, and how other children can achieve that same level. And TJ graduates. I also held a STEM provider conference where I brought in over 30 providers to speak over a weekend to talk about their programs for families that are interested. We sent it to the family liaison offices at all of the area middle school and elementary schools in Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, and Arlington counties, as well as we provided a pamphlet of how to reach them, so those services that they offer, and how parents, if they have a gifted student, can reach them, and what mechanisms they have to provide free and reduced services. So it destroys that narrative that people are just simply with resources have the ability to supplement their child's education, to get into TJ, to be competitive, to compete for TJ. So then at the diversity committee, with the work that I was doing there, I was passionate about the work, and then I was asked what I consider running for president, and I did. And that wasn't necessarily the easiest experience as well, because I was pro-merit, and we talk about this leftist power base. They seem to be anti-merit. They've gone so far as to say math is racist, and they say that merit is racist. And so I've gotten attacked. I've been attacked on that when I was nominated as president-elect by the nominating committee. You have Jenna Alexander from the Virginia PTA swoop in and try and manipulate the president at the time, Nick Koskeku, into violating Robert's rules, which is what they said, which they've done, what they accused us of doing, to try to come up with a slate of opposition candidates from that left power base to run in the election, and they lost.
So utilizing the PTA to leverage these positions in the community to insert people of their own ilk.
Yes.
I mean, it seems that's what we're talking about here. Brian, you're nodding your head. Is that what you're doing really here on the show today? Is stepping forth? Because I mean, have you just kind of had it with this? I mean,
absolutely. In fact, if you look at both the national PTA and the Virginia PTA and their social media and their statements, they put out a lot of far left statements and positions that I don't think have any place on in education. For example, on illegal immigration, they'll put out a position on a national issue that doesn't have to do with education about basically saying they want open borders. And like, that's not how you make the PTA inclusive. And so people focus on educational issues. They're basically pushing a far left agenda. And, one of the things that you see here is that PTAs are advocacy organizations, but it's not a hierarchical organization where the Virginia PTA or the national PTA tells the local PTAs what to do. It's the exact opposite. The local PTAs may advocate for, hey, we've got safety issues in our school, or we have rigor issues in academics in our school, and they work for that. And local PTAs put out their own advocacy positions. Collectively, they nominate and propose and get a state advocacy. But what effectively happened last year is, Harry and other leaders in the PTA, I wasn't involved at that point, were very concerned about the admissions process to TJ. And they were advocating for a merit-based policy. The Virginia PTA officers, who were very connected to the Democratic establishment in the state government, didn't like that. So they tried to suppress everything. After Harry got elected, they received, the Virginia PTA worked with the outgoing officers and others who didn't like Harry to raise anonymous complaints that couldn't even be verified. The opposition admitted they were deleting documents from the PTA organization, but yet they wouldn't let Harry remove control of the people who admitted they were deleting records. The Virginia PTA continued to back the people who were deleting records from our own PTA administration site, so we couldn't even defend ourselves. I mean, this is lawless beyond belief.
So back to Brian's comment, Harry, we'll bounce this to you. Back to Brian's comment, and let's fast forward a little bit here, that these organizations are not supposed to be a top-down, but apparently the Virginia PTA sees it differently. Get us caught up on that.
They do. They do see it very differently. Right now, within our PTA, they're going so far as to draft motions for members on our board to actually submit them to have passed. I mean, we've seen that. I've been in meetings where, Jason Morgan, who's the parliamentarian for the Fairfax County School Board, and, he's well connected with the Democratic Party, that school board, but he serves on our support committee, and he's actually been drafting motions for our second vice president, Gene Wang, to start passing. And it's a travesty because they're forcing people, they're really manipulating individuals to passing motions that are truly against their best interests. It's really sad to see. Right now they're even trying to manipulate to have me removed as the president because I've been speaking on media. More recently, when I spoke out against pedophilia, when I talked about the gross malfeasance in the Scott Smith case out in Loudoun County, in my capacity as a private person.
These events that I went out and covered.
Yes,
so
those events.
You received backlash from those. That was just the one was here in Fairfax. It was just last week. What happened after that?
After that, because there was a profile piece that came out on me.
I saw it. Was it the Wall Street Journal?
It was the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
They wanted to know who I was, and it was clearly that I was a dad taking on the Virginia PTA board. I didn't get a chance to speak, but I spoke my part outside, calling out, pedophilia and grooming of students.
And on our show, we went through and detailed the books.
And we went and we read the books. We had the story time. It was
absolutely
shocking. So what we've seen is, we can always go back to like the notice of probation letter the Virginia PTA said. This is not the first time that they've retaliated, because you can have a member that will go in front of the media and talk about something else in their own capacity, just as I'm doing now, and threaten to revoke an organization's ability to provide services for its student body. So with the Wall Street Journal piece that came out, it had profiled me, and Bill McGurn was a journalist, and he had mentioned that Harry Jackson's not just any parent. As I said, I have many different hats, and he said he's also the president of the school's PTSA, and I wasn't representing the Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology.
But the fact that he mentioned it.
He mentioned it.
Yeah.
They wanted to seize on that, and then they also seized on, and a correction was mentioned, but a correction really wasn't required. It said that the schools that were promoting pedophilia were in the library at Thomas Jefferson. Well, they weren't in Thomas Jefferson. They're in area surrounding high schools and middle schools, and certainly students at TJ do have access to them. If they're not in the library at TJ, they'll just do an interlibrary loan request and get access to them. But this is where the books that we were talking before, having, that were promoting sex between men and boys,
Sure.
and having graphical instructional material on how to, flat out pornography. But that is what prompted another round of retaliation. In addition to, and this is what is really absurd, is that after our first general membership meeting, where we have probation, one of the things we were required to do was to hire a parliamentarian and follow Robert's Rules of Order to the very strictest, to the letter of the law, at a standard that the Virginia PTA itself doesn't even meet. And that's what I did. So I ran the first meeting. In addition to all the other things that we had to adhere to our probation, that we satisfied, and I provided you the artifacts of how those were satisfied: a communications plan, plans of actions, and milestones. But what there really are, that's a conflict of interest. It was actually something I said.
Yeah, we have all these documents to share with you, which we'll load up.
It's a lot of documents, right? So
at any time, if you want me to pull anything up, Harry, just say the words. Right here?
If I can speak to the conflict of interest, because
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to go to you, Brian. I wanted to know your thoughts on PTA members going out in the community as concerns, because you've been a long time activist. So if they can come back on Harry, why can't they come back on membership as well?
Absolutely. And they try to pin say Harry has somehow a conflict of interest, then it's bad that Harry has to defend himself because he has nothing to be ashamed of. So let's talk about real conflict of interest. Conflicts of interest are typically designed for two reasons. Number one, there's some financial conflict of interest. And I've actually got a special prosecutor to rule that the Loudoun County School Board was violating the Conflict of Interest Act of Virginia. I had to go and file criminal complaints against it to get that happen. There's never been any accusations of any financial malfeasance against the TJ, PTSA, or Harry at all. The second one is that it's for a partisan reason, like you're running as a Republican or a Democrat for a position. Harry has never run for any government office in that capacity.
Right. They don't want somebody in there that's running for Congress using their position in the PTA to stump for election. That makes sense. Absolutely.
But who has done that?
That brought up a question in the pre-interview, right?
And the president of the Virginia PTA, the president, Pam Croom, and the president-elect of the Virginia PTA, Jenna Alexander, have both previously run as Democratic nominees for school board positions. This is a position that is not normally partisan, but both of them sought to get the nomination of their party. Pam Croom lost in Norfolk and Hampton area. Jenna Alexander, not only did she lose the nomination of the Democratic Party in Loudoun, she then said she was going to try to run as a third-party candidate and lost again. So these are people who are highly partisan, have failed multiple times, and are really trying to use the PTA to buffet their exposure and potentially get a second crack at the apple. They're accusing Harry of being partisan. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's clearly transparently partisan by themselves. And in the last meeting, part of their frustration is they came back and said, you need to follow the rules. Well, I've actually pursued lawsuits and I'm familiar with Robert's rules. We followed it to a T. In fact, we moved for three things simply to be on the agenda. The discussion of the membership fee, where TJ has the highest membership fee in the state. We wanted to lower it just to discuss it. We wanted to also discuss the Virginia PTA's letter about probation to the members so they can understand what's going on. And we wanted just to discuss standing rules so the meeting could go more efficiently. The coalition of the Virginia PTA and the officers that lost the last election objected to us even discussing that, and then claimed that we prevented the meeting from running efficiently. In other words,
they objected to a discussion. Those seem to be critical issues. Why would they? What was their ground for such an objection?
There is none. Their letter basically shows it's a partisan witch hunt. They want Harry removed because he didn't basically override Robert's Rules of Order and allow them to do everything they wanted. Now, our bylaws specifically state there's no electronic voting in general membership meetings, and there's a reason for that. We had people literally dialed in as parents, no idea who they are. And so when I asked for a roll call vote, they objected. They didn't even want the names. So our bylaws specifically disallowed on this, and when we brought up a point of order that it's illegal, they objected and said that their people should be able to override that and pass anything in conflict with the bylaws that they want. Basically, it's just a complete lawless organization that is trying to exert what they think they have social or political pressure and disregard our rule of law.
This is astonishing. This just sounds like the same conversations that I've been having with people fighting with their local school boards. I mean, it's the same playbook.
Yes.
Astonishing. Harry, you want to pull up? I'm flabbergasted by this, honestly.
Well, I mean, and there's a lot of evidence to show just how partisan it is, and these heavy-handed comments, and the people will have access to some of these things. The first one was just the letter of probation. This was dated the 23rd of June 2021.
Where do we find that?
What's your last email? The most recent email I sent to you. You might not have moved it over there into your drive.
All right, let me take this off screen. I got to get in my email. Why don't you explain that a little bit while I dig in there? I don't want to show my email.
There's a letter, and I guess for the viewers, I get a chance to take. This is a letter that was addressed to the prior president, and it had mentioned a lot of different things that were, and I think Brian will agree with me, that this letter here that was truly violates their own bylaws. for example, they don't.
That's
do
what
their own
Brian was
fact-finding.
referencing, right?
Yes, exactly what he's referencing. They don't. In this letter does not state any observable facts. It doesn't go through a fact-finding process. It doesn't even allow us as a PTSA to do our own fact-finding process and respond to it appropriately. These are basically just a list of general and vague accusations that were made that are impossible to not only prove but to also disprove. And and not only that, but it has information here that's categorically false. And what's interesting is that the date of this letter was the 23rd of June, 2021. This was before we even had our first meeting as an executive committee, or an executive board in our PTSA. So prior to this letter coming out, there was an article that had been mentioned that listed that the slate of candidates that won, the vast majority of us, with the exception of one, were disagreed with. And that's the key word. We just said we disagreed with critical race theory. And this is to show how extreme they are, that if you don't adhere to their ideology, to their worldview, to their truth, that they will come after you. And I mean, remember, I'm a moderate. I mean, even some people might label me as a right wing or GOP. That's not me the case at all. Anybody that does not see things through their lens will be attacked. And some of these things are just completely absurd.
Well, I mean, right here, I mean, just I see what you're getting at. As of the writing of this letter, it remains to be continual disregard and a series of violations of organizational standards. Additionally, the challenging and disrespect shown to the current president without adequate reason. So what they're saying is, if you challenge the current president and you disagree with the current president and they don't find your reasoning adequate, then you're
well,
in trouble. I mean, right?
That's a great point that you meant, right? Because the current president at that point, Bonnie Quinn, when I was being elected through the nominating committee process, she had voted against me because she said, I really don't want people to vote for you because you're black. And then later on, even online on social media, she had basically accused me of not being able to read, right? So, I mean, she really had those racial zingers. And you're kind of wondering why there would be some contention. This is also during the first week when she was, when we first was elected, one of the things that she did was she blocked all of the members of the executive board from being able to access Google Drive documents while they were deleting records, as Brian had pointed out. She'd also had locked our corresponding secretary out of the website, as well as our A to Z Connect, which were used to communicate with our membership, and violate our own bylaws, because per our bylaws, the executive board can call for meetings. So she was just clearly violating Robert's Rules of Order and our bylaws, and she was being supported by the Virginia PTA in those actions in doing so. And not only that, but she even had called members of our executive board. She actually had a very sexist email where she had said that the men are just voting against her, but do they expect the women to just take care of everything? Not realizing that myself, at one point, I used to be a single father, and and most of us, we do have child rearing responsibilities at the home. So it was just that's what they were defending.
Yeah, real quick, Brian, let me throw this at you. Attacking the principal, calling for her resignation, and then attempting to restrict her participation in the PTA is a direct violation of the values, and the principal cited. It sounds to me that's what they're doing to you.
It is. Well, not only that, but we never did that.
Am I reading that right?
That's what, nobody on our executive board attacked the principal. They're talking about somebody else in the PTA.
Go ahead, Brian.
Not me.
Well, it is. So I've been kind of an educational activist out in Loudoun County for going on 6-7 years once I found out they were violating federal law. And when I began to criticize them at PTA meetings or school board meetings or online, they illegally censored me. I had to file suit. Davison versus Randall made it to the Fourth Circuit and was the first one to rule that social media for government officials is a limited public forum and they can't ban you because of your viewpoint and because of criticism. Chairwoman Phyllis Randall out in Loudoun County spent $250,000 of taxpayer money to appeal my ruling in federal district court to the Fourth Circuit, where she lost and wasted all that money and set a precedent level case. So in taking a lot of these cases pro se, I'm familiar with due process and the rules and the bylaws of the Virginia PTA. The basic context is this. Both sides need to be able to state facts. Like, what are your factual allegations so that each side so that the arbiter or the other side can respond to those and say, no, here's evidence that did not happen. Only when the facts are kind of adjudicated can you reach conclusions. And then, for example, the Virginia PTA, if they had found a whole bunch of facts were against Harry, then they could potentially take conclusions. But what you see in that letter is there's no names. There's anonymous allegations of facts that can't even be supported. In fact, a lot of the sentences are not facts themselves, factual allegations. They're conclusions about, we don't think you've been sufficiently deferential to people, things like that. So the concept of due process was completely out the door, even though the Virginia PTA bylaws required them to do it. I assisted, some of the officers in writing response and saying, you haven't laid out the facts. You need to give us a chance to confront who's saying this and make a presentation. They completely disregarded that, just simply came back down and said, here's your probation letter. Now, I kind of disagreed with Harry and some of the ones who actually tried to compromise with the Virginia PTA, because I said, I know where this goes. I've dealt with it in Loudoun. They will never follow the law if they're not going to follow basic due process laws. But we're to a situation now where our bylaws say you can't have electronic votes and you can't violate it. Virginia PTA's latest letter a couple of days ago basically directed the executive board to disregard the bylaws and basically do whatever they said. At this point, there's nothing left to be done. I'm filing a lawsuit this week against both the rogue members of the TJ executive board who are colluding with the Virginia PTA and the Virginia PTA officers themselves for a breach of their fiduciary duty. I know how to do this. I've done these things in Loudoun, and I hope their lawyer wakes up and lets them know that they're certainly going to lose. Because when they say you can have electronic votes to push through their own agenda, when our bylaws specifically say that doesn't happen, or when the Virginia Non-Stock Corporation Act said the president sets the agenda and they look to remove him from presiding over the meeting. I mean, these are things that are just clear violations of law, but they don't care anymore. Who are they accusing of bullying here? What are they referencing? Because I think it's a great point, Brian. There, like you said, I mean, just skimming, this is the first time I really dug into this and looked at this. There's no real facts or names, or it's very, very vague. Who are they accusing of bullying, and what is this? What are these aggressive emails that they're referring to? Is that you, Harry?
I think that was me, the aggressive emails when I addressed the current president about her conduct and emails and harassment to other members of the executive board. Calling them, yelling at them on the phone.
Well, how were you aggressive according to them? What did you say that was aggressive?
By just standing up and taking a leadership position when you see something that is wrong, and standing up and saying you shouldn't be doing that and calling it out. That's what they're calling about as an aggressive email. But then again, it's not supported by fact. What am I being aggressive about? That's what they need to really talk about. And I think most of the people would agree with me. I think the community would agree with me that the actions I took were appropriate.
It's astonishing to me. I mean, I remember when I was an educator and working with young people, and, every now and then you get a complaint, Mr. E yelled at me. I never raised my voice whatsoever. I just, laid out the facts to the student, spoke in a maybe slightly firm tone, as sometimes you have to do with young people. And it's like you couldn't, it got to a point with so many students that you couldn't even engage in normal conversation. And if it was something that they didn't want to hear, then they went to, you're yelling at me. And we're seeing so much. I see this, Harry. I think you and I talked offline about what we're seeing in the school board meetings. And Brian, maybe you can concur. All the training that I went through as a teacher identifying bullying behavior, we're seeing those in positions of power that are acting the part of the bully these days, and then turning this gaslight on to try to make those that are standing up to their bullying the bad guy. I mean, it's really rather psychotic. I'm having a difficult time getting my mind around what I'm seeing.
Absolutely. Look at the Scott Smith case, where he was about to talk about what happened with him. And, his daughter was assaulted in a bathroom, and they knew they were fully aware of what happened. This is malfeasance.
They knew what he knew.
What he was about. They knew, and he was about to go up there and to speak because they had proposed a measure that would put other children at risk, and it did put other children at risk, and it did result in another assault, and they baited him. And, and again, heavy-handed tactics. They had 4 sheriffs drag him out, stripped him, he's basically stripped down. They made a mockery out of him for months. I can only imagine the hell that man went through.
Sam, let me give you a little more history on Loudon. I've been at this 7 years. When I first started, I found out that under a provision of the No Child Left Behind Act and some of the waivers that were given for that schools were supposed to create what is called a student growth, growth measures for students' academic performance. Virginia created a student growth percentile. It was required to be used in order for them to get federal funding. Both the VDOE and all the districts just ignored it. 48 other states were having large, debates about whether they should or should not. Virginia just lied to the federal government. I have that from an assistant U.S. Attorney who brought in the general counsel of the Department of Education. All acknowledged there was fraud. But when I criticized the school board to their face and criticized specifically a school board member named Debbie Rose in 2015, she filed a criminal complaint against me for things, just criticism of her official conduct at school board meetings and on social media. That is how they weaponize speech. Any criticism against them in their activities, they did that. Later on, because I continued to criticize them, I issued FOIA requests. I caught them in perjury in circuit court. The Virginia State Police said that Davison's complaint against perjury was well documented and credible. Soon after I did that, they banned me from my kid's school, a no trespass letter for 8 months. They reported Child Protective Services, where nobody has ever accused me of being a bad father. In fact, in discovery, we got records that the chief of staff and the attorney of Loudoun County Public Schools had made written notes about, well, he hasn't done anything bad against his kids. Can we get him for some other reason? And they still reported me. Later on, cooler heads, at the end of the year, they demoted the principal, put a new one in, and I haven't had problems before, but I had to file lawsuits. They literally take Nazi tactics to suppress any thought anywhere at any time.
Many parents are afraid to speak out for fear of retaliation against themselves or their children due to the regular FOIA requests for parent-principal communications issued by outside associations in relation to the changes in the admissions process. So they're blaming you. They're blaming you for outside associations doing legal FOIA requests for communications that would support, they're looking for information that would support their claims and causes regarding their concerns about the admission process. This is what a concerned, educated citizenry does, and this is why we have FOIA requests. So people are they're scared because people in the community are out there looking for information in regards to names are blacked out. Names are redacted. Right. Exactly. So you're to blame because people are intimidated by other people asking questions about the admissions process. Am I getting that right?
By other people.
By other people, right. Outside organizations. Right, she's not even accusing you.
Well, I mean, I've been demonized. So, I mean, this is basically from... This is from other organizations that have FOIA'd our principals' communications regarding TJ admissions process, and it showed embarrassing information where it showed she was actively involved, being an activist, colluding with the Fairfax NAAP, which is majority white, by the way. They don't really speak about part of black communities, just so the people are aware in Northern Virginia. A 501c4 political lobbying group, and as well as with the Secretary of Education, Atif Carney. And by the way, he was a McAuliffe appointee, so he's, that's how he got his start. Then also the Northam campaign about collecting those embarrassing emails. But you're right. Is it really appropriate to retaliate, to use this mechanism, and then partner again? It's very partisan. To partner with the Virginia PTA to use this to preemptively place a parent-teacher student organization on probation.
So one of the reasons your organization was placed, and this was big news when it happened, and then they turned around and backpedaled, was because parents are attacking other parents on social media and in closed class level parent-run Facebook pages, and they've been left unchecked. What does that have to do with you and your organization? There's not an accusation against you. They're saying this is going on in your community, therefore we need to chastise and sanction your organization. I don't know. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Maybe I'm reading it wrong or it's out of context.
No, you're reading that correctly.
Okay.
You're reading that correctly. There are parents that run their own Facebook groups, their own face of class of 2024, 2025, their own Facebook groups.
As they have a right to do in a free country. Yeah. But what does that have to do with you and your organization?
That's a great question, because it doesn't. It has nothing to do with us. But they want to punish us. They want to use us as the whipping boy.
Wow.
Because they have parents who are going into what Brian said before, like, look at the Virginia PTA social media policy. If you write anything that might be deemed like, someone unfriendly, they want to block you. In this case, they're not deeming that you're sufficiently embracing, communism. Therefore, they want to talk to the parents of the PTSA. Like we cannot be held responsible for the actions of others that they exercise their First Amendment rights or their First Amendment rights of association. It has absolutely nothing to do with our organization.
So as a citizen and a member of both the TJ PTSA, Belmont Ridge, in Loudon PTSA and for the Virginia PTA, I put questions on the social media of the Virginia PTA website, specifically saying, hey, why do we have a president and a president-elect who were prior partisan politicians and have moved to put TJ on probation? They banned me. They banned me from all comments on the Virginia PTA webpage. When I asked, they wouldn't respond to me in any other way, never told me why. During the September 2021 TJ PTSA meeting, we had a 45-minute question and answer where anybody could ask questions of Harry, of other officers, of the principal, anything. And I asked the Virginia PTA president, Pam Croom, why was I banned? And she said, I wasn't adhering to their policy of being friendly on the Virginia PTA website. So that is the kind of totalitarian, autocratic nonsense that these organizations are out to get. And they're going to do it as long as until somebody sues them. And unfortunately, I found the same thing in Loudon, that people are scared of retaliation, but if they know you will not take legal action, they don't care what the law says, because they know they have nothing to worry about. It's not until people have demonstrated that they will enforce their rights that you actually have those rights.
And I'm going to throw this at you, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, because there's a lot. We can do multiple shows on this, and I would like to. But what you just pointed out, gentlemen, is exactly why this story right here is so important. Because they're getting into the heads and they're getting demographic information from your families and getting into the heads of your kids and getting into the heads of your family members. And now, in light of these actions that you're pointing out and that are clearly evidenced, this story should scare the hell out of any freedom-loving American.
Yes, it should.
Gentlemen, Harry, let's do this. We only got a couple minutes left. I want you to give a rundown here real quick of the documents that we are going to provide to our viewers. And what are we looking at? And explain what they should be looking for. Go ahead.
So we went through the probation letter and we went through the terms of the probation recommendations going forward. So you'll see as a community that we did our due diligence as a PTSA. We went above and beyond, putting together plans of actions and milestones, meeting every criteria per the letter of probation. Now, I agree with Brian, we should not have accepted the probation, but for those of you, for the viewers that are watching, to have a little bit of empathy with our community. People were scared. Our PTSA, they do a lot of activities. They provide a lot. Mental health is a large concern within our group, and And parents were scared that, that these services that are provided for our kids are going to be taken away from them arbitrarily. And they're not, and a lot truly believe that this would just go away if they just acquiesced. And there was an overwhelming pressure to do that, even though that wasn't the right thing to do. So trying to work through that, which you'll see in these documents, it shows all the artifacts that we did to meet the terms of our probation. And the one thing that's really that they're having a problem with, the very vague concepts.
Oh, there's audio and video files in here as well.
There's audio and video. It's about opening up meaningful two-way communication. There's even the chats that talks about what happened in these meetings. And you'll see that I have all the artifacts of the plans, are parliamentarian, we're following Robert's rules. The big areas of controversy that have happened recently are dealing with our last two general membership meetings. Brian pointed out on the 9th of September, I had followed a general membership meeting to the strictest order by the letter of law, Robert's rules. And despite opening up for 45 minutes of questions and answers, where I answered every single person who had a question. No one who had a question was ever turned away. 45 minutes. They're saying that didn't meet the threshold of meaningful two-way communication. I think a reasonable person would disagree with that. You'll also see from that 9 September meeting, the recommendations we solicited from our parliamentarian, a professional. We've asked for his recommendations. He provided them. His recommendation, for the most part, just said to allow for 10 minutes of additional discussion regarding the adoption of the budget, and this was an oversight on my part, to publish the results of the vote. The vote was approved. I read it aloud so everyone saw it, and I also confirmed the parliamentarian if it was done appropriately, and I was informed that it was. It'll show that the anonymous accusation that we received afterwards from the Virginia PTA claiming that we violated the terms of our probation, which scared everyone in our community. Now, it was sent anonymously, but the Azure ID of that email identified that the person sending it was Jenna Alexander, the president-elect. They're also the person that was involved.
Yeah, right here. She's at the top in the personal complaint.
Yeah,
not personnel complaint, but personal complaint.
Personal complaint. Now, this one here is from our TJ, from our subcommittee. Now, this is the fact finding where we looked at their alleged allegations. Well, not only that, but we looked into the allegations. They didn't want to cooperate on what they viewed. They said.
So this is where you broke it down.
This is where we broke it down. This was independent of our parliamentarian, where we talked about what their complaint consisted of. And then later on, you'll see the Virginia support team's complaint that came days later to justify their vague conclusion that they failed to substantiate the first time.
Okay.
And then we also then included later on our observations regarding their findings, which weren't proper.
Okay, Brian?
Now, despite that...
I'm just kind of scrolling through here. We're going to make these public so you all can go. I'll put links and put these on the server and you all can download them and go through them on your own. So, Brian, you want to say something?
Right. So we understand a lot of people don't have experience in making like an adjudication or like making a complaint and finding what the facts are. So we offered, and I volunteered to help, that if somebody had any complaint, they could put it in. We would help them identify the facts that they said, resulted in a violation or some egregious contact. We would then allow the other person who was accused to respond, but we would help the process. I would help them write all this stuff down. I was not going to make any decision. I may make a recommendation to the executive board, but everything would be written down. So unlike the Virginia PTA letter that just has random conclusions that are unsupported by any facts, we said anybody has a complaint, we'll help you do this. So it will be clear. And then if the Virginia PTA can come in and look at it and say, well, no, those are not the facts. They could critique any part of it.
So you have meeting videos in here as well.
Yes,
absolutely. We record exhibits. We record exactly what we did. So every possible thing we did it. Virginia PTA ignored that, and nobody to our knowledge has made any complaints against us. In other words, since we offered this complaint process, nobody has raised any complaints. So the question is, how can the Virginia PTA come and say we're not following our laws when nobody has filed any internal complaints against Harry or anybody else in the entire time going through our process? It's because they know they don't have facts to support it. They want to say, we're not getting our agenda through, therefore Virginia PTA come and oust Harry illegally. And that's what's really going on. They don't believe in any objective process or rule of law.
Wow. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and move to real quick in this next folder, and then we're going to need to wrap this up. This is October 2021. So this is right up to date now. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, that's what recently happened. So if you look at the Virginia support letter recommendations, even though that we said that this in meetings that hey, this is not going to work, this is going to cause chaos, and a lot of the chaos that we talk about a hostile work environment, those conditions were created by the Virginia PTA, specifically the president-elect's actions when interactions with us the last academic year. But that being said, I said, well, then I'm going to go try this next meeting according to their recommendations. And this meeting, it was chaotic. We didn't even get an opportunity to get even the agenda approved or get the business passed. And the reason why is that because of this dissension that was created in our community by the Virginia PTA, you had members asking for legitimate motions. And we had to vote on them, and it bogged down the meeting. And what's interesting is that, with the Virginia PTA's threat or recommendations to remove me, they're only citing two individuals. Myself, they said that me and Mr. Davison colluded. We did not on that one. Another member, which I did not collude with, they asked legitimate motions, and they completely ignore members that are their supporters, which were more numerous, that passed more motions that created a delay that prevented us from having the meeting to be conducted. And they're just vilifying me, and for some reason they think that removing me is going to get rid of the problems. No, there are going to be other parents who are going to stand up for their children.
Sam, let me jump in and give a comparison contrast before the first two meetings. So Harry wisely in the September meeting ran through a whole bunch of reports and introductions before we had any motions or had anything done. So the meeting didn't get bogged down. So there's a lot of information that was presented. Then there was a discussion on the budget, and that's where motions can get raised and there can be debate. And that was some of the complaints about the Virginia PTA. And then there was 45 minutes of discussion at the end. So we all thought that the first meeting ran very well. Information was provided. You had a time for a vote, and then you had open discussion. Virginia PTA's major complaint was we didn't allow for enough motions and enough parliamentary procedure. Now, if you've ever followed Congress, you know that if two sides don't agree, they can stall and make motions and slow everything down. And we predicted that. We said if you run everything and even the agenda has to be approved and people can make motions, that if there's just bitter ill will, it won't go forward. So at the beginning of the October meeting, it was decided that the agenda needs to be put forth for a vote. Virginia law doesn't require that. The president can dictate it, but in the interest of transparency and collaboration, it was done. Virginia PTA is now claiming that because people on our side made amendments, things like, hey, let's consider standing rules. Let's consider the membership fee. Not that what those ultimately would be, but just because we put them on the agenda, that we stalled the meeting. If they had simply said, hey, let's pass this, we'll put it on the agenda, that would have been finished in 10 minutes. We would have moved on. They stalled. They obstructed. They refused to have roll call vote, even though we had people whose name was parent on there. Now, our bylaws say that even in-person meetings, if there's a 2/3 vote or anything, you have to verify the identity of the members. The Virginia PTA told us we didn't have to do that. Electronics were allowed in online meetings, even though it specifically didn't say that. And they objected when Harry said, hey, we've gone past the 2-hour meeting threshold. We cannot verify any identities of these votes, and it's not consistent with our bylaws. And the Virginia PTA is saying, because Harry followed the bylaws and he didn't push through their agenda, Harry should be removed from office. That's literally what their last letter said. It's just wacko.
So where are you right now? And then we really do need to call this. Where are you right now with this, Harry?
Well, right now, the Virginia PTA is working with rogue members of our executive board, holding secret meetings, holding secret votes. And I don't know what action they're going to take. We have our last announcement that was posted that has inaccurate information posted about me about the Wall Street Journal that came out. Well, I didn't get a chance to review it. They didn't take it down, but I was informed that they met in secret to vote on it in the presence of the Virginia PTA to post that to the website. So we'll wait and see. I mean, they clearly are not following the rule of law, and they're intent on doing whatever they intend to do. And I think they're going to move pretty quickly, particularly with the election coming up. I think they want to see their guy get elected, and they want to expand their power base. Oh,
I'm sure when this thing hits the airwaves too, this isn't going to settle well.
And Sam, I'm filing a case in my own capacity against the rogue officers of the TJ PTA and the Virginia PTA officers for breach of their fiduciary duties. They basically violated their own bylaws and told the TJ to violate its own bylaws. I'm going to be asking for an injunction to keep the status quo until the court can go through and reconcile, what is the truth here and what has happened, because Harry has done nothing wrong. He followed the procedural rules to a T last time, and yet they're still have a personal vendetta against them and are carrying out a winch hunt. So that's how our country operates, and they're about to find out how the legal system works.
Yeah, fabulous story, guys. Pardon me. I so appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure there's a lot more to this. So again, folks, we're gonna let you peruse the documents yourself and see where you stand. And all I can do is defer to the judgment of our viewers on this. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm going to need to take some time to go through this too. But I'm with you guys. I mean, it seems to be, again, I'll say it, just right out of the standard playbook. And what I am going to do, and I'm going to say this, if I do this most shows, if anybody out there has a differing opinion, if anybody out there would like to challenge the statements or any sort of accusations, or challenge the presented facts and documents and put them into a different context and offer a different viewpoint. You know what? We live in a free nation. We're all grown adults here, and you're welcome to come on the show and agree to disagree, perhaps even enter into a debate. Wouldn't that be absolutely fascinating? And I've been putting these challenges out over and over and over, and now and then I get snarky comments on our Facebook posts and our videos, but nobody ever takes me up on coming on and actually presenting an alternative view and be willing to engage in a reasonable debate on the issues with the guests that I've had on these shows. And I'm, you know what, I would say, just like I'm not surprised by this story, I'm not surprised by the lack of them taking me up on that offer. Gentlemen, thank you so much for what you're doing for our community. And Brian, let's follow up, because I'd like to learn more about your activism. Any closing thoughts real quick? Harry, 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you, Sam. Members of Northern Virginia, elections matter. They really, really matter. When you go to the polls to vote, exercise your right to vote, but realize if you vote one way, this trend will only continue and will get worse. We have another candidate that's running that is for merit-based meritocracy. He's for He's for judging a person based on the content of the character, not the content of their skin, and he's also against pedophilia in schools.
Very good. And Mr. Davison, your last word?
Yes, I would say freedom of speech and the freedom to organize is extremely important. I've actually helped people on both sides of the political spectrum protect their rights to speech. I'm not trying to impose any view. I have my own beliefs, but I say let's have a fair debate. Let's go campaign and have elections, and then let the public win. But we got to protect our right to free speech and minority rights.
Nicely said, gentlemen. Dr. Davis, or I should say Dr. Jackson, and Brian Davison, thank you so much for coming on, sharing this story. We're going to, as I said, we'll put this up at a blog post with links to all of the relevant documentation. And wow, man, y'all, I got an idea for you. When's your next bake sale? I mean, how did we get to this point? Seriously, I make a mean cannoli, gentlemen. I make a mean cannoli, and I will donate my culinary skills to help bring y'all together in love and in peace. And we'll do it for the children. We'll do it for the children. What do you think?
We'll have to take you up on that.
All right.
We should be having bake sales, not having these type of discussions.
Exactly.
And a parent-teacher organization. This is absolute madness.
It is. Gentlemen, God bless you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, absolutely. Well, there you have it. The trouble with TJ PTA right here. You heard it. This just gets more absurd every show. I mean, I'm finding this absolutely fascinating because I love to talk and I love to dig in, and there's a part of me that kind of likes to engage in the controversies that are happening within our society. That's part of my personality. But I gotta tell you, man, this just gets more and more and more. You know what I feel like? I feel like I am in a Twilight Zone episode, a classic Rod Serling Twilight Zone episode that was co-written by the guys from Monty Python. That's where I feel I am. So there you have it. I'm Ettaro, and we're going to keep looking at education. Listen, let's have some fun. Let's do some entertainment next time around. I want to start a cooking show. There's so many things that we can do here at novanow.tv, and we would love to see you get involved. If you would like to be a reporter, if you would like to have your own show on novanow.tv, please contact me. We're looking to expand. And speaking of expanding, guys, I need your help. I need your help. You got to go to the YouTube channel. You got to like, you got to subscribe, you got to share our content. And if you want to support us directly, head over to novanow.tv and click on the subscriptions button and pick a subscription plan and send us a few bucks a month to keep this wonderful content going, because we do not accept advertisers on this network. This is all about you, for Nova. I am Sam Ettaro, coming to you from my virtual studios in beautiful Fairfax County, Virginia, and you have just watched another episode of novanow.tv. And as I say every show, I'm Ettaro, and I'm out. Peace.